Hello, little enzymes. Welcome back to Dacia's Digest. The topic of today's video is failing fathers. This is probably going to be long. We have two long stories and they both have updates. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And let's go ahead and get into it. So the first story is titled, "Am I in the wrong for telling my ex-husband that our kids are justified in feeling like they don't have a father?" I'm 33 and have two kids, 12 and 8. I divorced their dad when I discovered he was cheating on me with a mom from our younger son's school group. Despite that betrayal, I agreed to share custody because I wanted my kids to grow up with their father in their lives. However, since the divorce, he's only been around when he's picking them up for visits. He often goes out with his stepchildren, but rarely includes our kids, claiming those outings are spur of the moment and he can't always include them. Eventually, I stopped pushing, but I've always thought it was unfair that he keeps his distance from our children's lives. Recently, I decided to upgrade my older son's computer and he asked if we could give his old one to his cousin, my brother's son. My brother has been a huge support for my kids. He's always available to take them to their school events when I can't, and often takes them out to the park or for trips when I'm busy. My ex, on the other hand, is rarely available for them. Anytime I ask him to help with an activity, he has an excuse. He's out of town or swamped with work. Ironically, though, whenever his stepkids need something, he's there. Once, he even argued with the stepkid's father at a school event, insisting he had the right to be there. Ain't that about a... When my ex found out I gave the computer to my nephew, he got upset. He complained that if I had money to spare on a gift like that, I should have forgiven 2 months of child support he'd missed since his finances were tight with a new baby. Sir, that is not her issue. You knew your finances were tight before the baby came. I'm sorry. So you want her kids, your older kids, to lack in financial support because of your poor planning? No. She continues, he added that if I could give away a computer, I should have gifted it to either his kids or his stepkids, who share just one computer among the three of them. I told him my finances were none of his business and that I owed nothing to his stepchildren. Exactly. Then his wife jumped into the conversation, accusing me of spoiling my son by giving him a new computer and of being petty for letting my son bring it to their house, claiming it was just to show off in front of his step-siblings. I told her that she had no right to speak to me that way or question my decisions. I added that I allow my kids to see their father so they can grow up with him in their lives, not so she can interfere with how I parent. My ex was offended, but I told him the whole situation could have been avoided if his wife hadn't inserted herself where she doesn't belong. Right, because why are you even speaking, ma'am? After that, things seemed to calm down until last week. I went to pick up the kids and my ex was visibly upset. He explained that he'd tried reading a bedtime story to our youngest. At home, he still likes to be read to before bed, usually by me, his brother, or my brother, and when none of us are around, he listens to audiobooks. Apparently, my ex wanted to make an effort to connect, so he offered to read to him. But our son turned him down, saying he didn't need him for that because he could do it himself. My ex stayed to listen as he searched for a story for 8-year-olds without a dad, end quote, on his tablet, and it hit him hard. Yikes. The 8-year-old is a savage. In front of your father, you search story for 8-year-olds without a dad. That's sad, though. That's sad because that is a huge indicator of how that child is feeling. That's very sad. Opie says, the next day, my ex offered to take our older son to basketball practice, but he replied that he'd be going with his dad. He quickly corrected himself and said, "Uncle." That made my ex even angrier, and when I came to pick up the kids, he confronted me about it. I told him that if our kids feel they don't have a father, he has only himself to blame. He tried to shift the blame onto me, saying I was the one pushing him away from his role. I told him it's up to him to show up for his kids, not something I can do for him. I reminded him he was the one who broke our family, and he's chosen to be more involved with his stepkids than with his own children. I told him not to kid himself. The kids are growing up and they're starting to see the reality of who he is as a father. If he keeps this up, he can't expect much from them in the future. After that exchange, his mom called me. While she's always been polite to me, I felt the need to say that I would have appreciated this same concern from her when she supported her son's affair. Ooh, knowing her grandchildren were losing their father in the process. Yikes. She hung up and we haven't spoken since. My brother advised me that I had every right to express how I feel, but he suggested that maybe this discussion shouldn't have happened in front of the kids. Later, my ex texted me saying that if I weren't so difficult, he'd spend more time with them. Bruh, whoo, men. Some men, okay, whatever. But what a cop-out, bro. If you weren't so difficult, I'd spend more time with my kids. What do you mean? If I had children, nothing could keep me from spending time with my children. Literal, my children. Not a difficult parent. Like, I would be trying to do everything in my power to spend more time with them. It's one thing if you say that she's not letting you see them or something like that, but you are choosing not to see them because you don't want to deal with their mother. That's trash behavior. OP says, I told him his duty as a father doesn't depend on whether I'm easy or not, and he knows I've never prevented him from seeing the kids. The truth is, when he has to choose, he prefers outings with his stepkids over his own children, and that's something only he can change, period. Now, I would understand if she was like harmful or always trying to fight or, something like that. But it just sounds like she probably is a difficult person and he just don't feel like dealing with it, which is crazy because you chose to have kids with this person. And your kids need you either way, regardless. And she's not preventing you from seeing them. So anyway, some of the comments, someone said, you can only do so much, OP, and don't let him off the hook for any child support. The fact that it's stretching his budget is a him problem, not a you problem. And I agree with your brother that conversation should not have happened in front of the kids. But if I understand correctly, your ex chose the time and place, not giving you much choice in the matter, not the a-hole. Someone else, I love how if she had extra money, she should forgive child support, but him already knowing money was tight wasn't a reason to not have another kid. That's a good one. Someone said, your kid is ruthless. Good for him, referring to him looking up the story for 8-year-olds without a dad. Oh, that's terrible. So 11 days later, she said, these past days have been a bit unusual. First, I want to thank all of you. I didn't expect to receive so much advice, and I never thought this app would be so useful. It's not very popular in my country. Now, back to the topic. My ex sent me messages saying he wanted to resolve things, stop arguing, and talk to me. I agreed. He came to my house and we didn't beat around the bush and we went straight to the point. He asked me if I really thought he was a bad father. I replied that, looking back now, I never would have chosen him to be the father of my children. She is, cutthroat. I mean, she's spitting facts. That's probably how I would have said it too, not gonna lie. So she continues, he said it wasn't easy for him, and I answered that it wasn't easy for me either because I take on both his role and mine. He told me he couldn't leave his stepchildren without a father because he had already broken their family, and I replied that he had left his own children without a father. He started crying and told me it was my fault, saying that when the infidelity happened, I refused to forgive him or go to couples therapy. This guy can't take accountability if someone superglued it in his hand. How are you blaming all of your bad decisions on other people? Like, own up to the things that you do, bro. She continues, I kept telling him things. I'll admit they weren't kind, but none of them were lies. He asked me if, given his current state, I didn't feel sorry for him, and I said no. He told me he didn't think I could be so cruel, and I replied that when I changed jobs, pulled my kids out of school 2 months before the end of the term, moved houses, and watched him disappoint our kids over and over again, any empathy I might have felt turned into apathy. Facts. He left after that. His mother called me and said she knew what I had told her son, that he hadn't stopped crying, and that she didn't understand how I could carry so much hatred to hurt her son like that. She said I should just get over it. I answered, with all due respect, what I said wasn't out of hatred, but out of truth. If your son is crying, it's because he's finally facing the consequences of his actions. Maybe instead of worrying about how he feels now, you should have taught him to take responsibility and treat people with respect. She said I didn't know what it was like to feel a mother's love and see a child suffer. How does she not know that? She's literally seeing her own children suffer. Anyways, so OP says, and I replied that I did understand because I have 2 children who cry over a living father. Right. 2 children who see their dad being a father to other kids when he doesn't have time to be their father. She said he was sorry, and I told her not to put words in his mouth and to stop calling me about anything related to her son. I hung up. I wanted to cry so badly, but I'm a dang mother, and I don't have time for that. I want my kids to feel safe, loved, and strong enough not to need anyone, not even me, to be themselves. Last Thursday, I took my kids to their cousin's birthday party hosted by my ex-sister-in-law. I still have a good relationship with her. She was the one who told me about the infidelity and that her mother was already encouraging it. My ex showed up alone and irritated. My kids kept their distance from him. They kissed his hand, but then ignored him completely. My ex-mother-in-law told the kids they should show more respect to their father, and my eldest replied that he doesn't show respect for me since he and his partner talk badly about me. Not them talking badly about OP in front of the children. OP said, I scolded my son not for what he said, but for how he addressed his grandmother. I told him it was wrong to eavesdrop on private conversations and repeat them. Then I asked him to gather his things because we were leaving. My ex-mother-in-law asked me not to leave, saying the kids were having fun and we could resolve this as adults. She asked my ex what he had said and he claimed not to remember. I told her I didn't care and she said we should be good parents. I replied that to be good parents, you need to be good people first. Oh man, I love OP. My ex was getting agitated. My ex-mother-in-law asked why we couldn't have a civilized co-parenting relationship. I told her everything I've mentioned here about his free will to see the kids and how the second custody agreement isn't working since he only sees them some weekends. My ex didn't want to discuss it, saying he had too many kids at home. My ex-mother-in-law told him the only kids who should feel comfortable are his, and the comfort of the others should be provided by their biological father. Okay, so the mother-in-law is finally speaking some sense, because this entire time she's been sounding like an op, trying to make excuses for her son, encouraging him to cheat on his wife. So I'm glad she has some brain cells left. OP continues, my ex wanted to end the conversation because his mother was scolding him for being a careless father. He also said it was my fault. I asked him to clarify how it was my fault. I said, you can see the kids whenever you want. What more do you want? He started yelling, claiming I was only being petty because I didn't really need the money since I earned more than him and had fewer kids to feed. I told him I wouldn't continue the conversation and that I'd show him what being uncivilized looks like by filing for the overdue child support payments. His mother asked what I meant by overdue payments. I explained that he was 3 months behind. She was furious, slapped him, and demanded to know what he had done with the money for his children. He answered, I couldn't let JR miss out on attending the same school as my son. I didn't want him to feel inferior. This man is pissing me off. Deadbeat of all deadbeats. And to make it worse, not only are you a deadbeat to your own kids, but you're treating your stepchildren even better than your own biological kids. It doesn't get any worse. Opie says, my ex-mother-in-law said she couldn't believe it and they started arguing and I left. For context, my youngest son attends a private school and my ex pays for his stepson to attend the same school. Yesterday, my ex-mother-in-law came over and said she would pay the overdue fees. She brought me the money in cash. I knew my ex would be furious. Here's some context. My ex-mother-in-law doesn't work, doesn't own anything herself, and lives with my ex-sister-in-law. However, she does have significant savings from her inheritance. If she pays the tuition, my ex knows there won't be much left for him when she passes, even though she's still healthy. He's been asking her for years to invest some of that money in his business ideas, but she's always refused. My ex's retaliation was not picking up the kids this weekend. Sir, Stuff like this really just solidifies my decision to be child-free. Because I'll be doggone. If I'm married, I'm thinking this guy is going to be a certain way, and he end up like this mother right here? Ain't no way. So you think the best course of action for you being late on your child support payments, your mother having to cover the child support payments for you, because the reason that you were late is because you were paying private school tuition for your stepson, so you leave your biological son in a deficit. The best reaction to that situation was to not pick up your kids. Lord. Opie says, yesterday my ex-sister-in-law called me. She doesn't know all the details yet, but apparently my ex's 15-year-old stepson punched him in the mouth. She said she'll let me know exactly what happened once she finds out. Oh. And before anyone asks, the new custody arrangement will likely take a year to finalize. The court says the overdue payments are the priority and the rest can wait. They say we have more urgent cases. This is a freaking mess. So now not only do your biological kids not like you, don't really claim you as their daddy, claiming their uncle as their father because he shows up more than you. Now the stepkids that you've been fighting for and supporting over your biological kids, one of them punched you in the mouth. You paying his private school tuition and he punching you in the mouth. Ain't that about it, bitch? Ooh. Some of the comments, someone said, at least his mom finally got some freaking sense. Her son is a piece of crap. Another person, he obviously fed her a line of BS when she was defending him. Right. Someone else, when the evil mother-in-law turns on her spoiled child, you know he was 100% wrong. It's not even a question of perspective anymore. And the last comment, the chef's kiss was being punched by the stepson he prioritized his own kids over. I bet he feels utterly ridiculous now. Right. And he deserves it. So the second update was 1 day later. Opie says, a promise is a promise. As I mentioned earlier, my ex's stepson had an altercation with him because my ex refused to let him go out. Now I have more details. My ex's stepson had plans to go bowling with some friends. His biological father had already given him permission and money for the outing. However, when he told his mother, she said he couldn't go because they needed him to stay home and watch his younger siblings. My ex and his wife had planned an outing and needed someone to stay with the kids. That's not fair. That's not his responsibility. Y'all need to hire a babysitter. Opie said this led to an argument. The boy raised his voice to his mother and my ex stepped in to demand that he respect her. The boy replied that he wasn't his father. Trying to maintain authority, my ex told him that as long as he lived under his roof, he had to follow his rules. The boy ignored him and turned away. My ex followed him and touched his shoulder to get his attention. At that moment, the boy turned around, punched him, and shouted that he wasn't his father and he could never compare to him. Ooh. The mother scolded him for his behavior, but the boy, still angry, shouted back that he hated her. Yikes! This version was shared by my ex and his wife to my ex-mother-in-law. My sister-in-law later related to me. They went to see my ex-mother-in-law to try to gain her sympathy and convince her to take care of the kids, the 2 stepchildren and the baby, so they could go out. However, my ex-mother-in-law told them she would not take care of the children. This just gets better and better. Better in some ways, worse in others, because the kids are just being affected by all of this. Opie said, when I spoke to my ex, he mentioned he was dealing with family issues and claimed that the boy's biological father was turning him against him. He didn't give me many details and omitted most of what my sister-in-law had shared. He simply informed me that, due to the situation, he wouldn't be able to pick up our children this weekend. The 15-year-old boy is now staying with his biological father. As for what I mentioned earlier, my ex was 2 months behind on child support, and that same week he was supposed to make another payment. He didn't, leaving him 3 months behind. In the end, his mother was the one who covered the overdue amount. Regarding the child who attends the same school as my son, it's not the 15-year-old involved in the altercation. It's his younger stepbrother, who is 8 years old, the same age as my son. Oh, okay. So I had that wrong. I thought the 15-year-old was the one at the private school. Even still, the fact that you are so worried about these stepchildren and they ain't effing with you, that's hilarious. Opie said, I decided to enroll my son in that school when the affair became public. At the time, I was working as a kindergarten teacher at the same school, and the boy had been one of my students. We all knew each other, and to protect my children from rumors, I transferred them to a private school. This happened 2 months before the school year ended. Thanks to the circumstances and the support of some kind people, we managed to get them admitted. All right, so some comments. Someone said, so even after the punch and the argument, they still wanted to go out? What a pathetic excuse for parents. I hope their marriage eventually falls apart. Someone else said, not only did they want to go out, but it's funny how he had money to take his new wife out, but not pay his child support for his 2 biological children. Right. Someone else, I think it's funny that because of the altercation, he said he couldn't take his own children for the weekend. So the 15-year-old was right. The man would never compare to the kid's father. The kid's own father is a better man. Another person, a true father, would prioritize his children's needs, especially during a conflict. Instead, he uses the situation to avoid his responsibilities. That is just sad. That gives me a super ick. Update 3, it was 4 days later. She says, first of all, I don't know much about how subreddits work, but someone told me that my profile was shared on one, and I have some words for those involved. And then there's an editor's note before we get into that. It says, on the original Best of Reddit update, none of the top comments mentioned salaries, and a reminder again not to brigade the post or harass the original poster. The original poster didn't say which country she is in, but does reply to a comment in Spanish. I also am not sure what the monetary comparisons relate to. So then we get into OP's actual posts. She says, the discussion was about how I could afford private school tuition on a kindergarten teacher's salary. To clarify, I am no longer a kindergarten teacher, I am a high school teacher, and salaries in education vary significantly depending on the country. In my country, salaries in education are quite competitive compared to other jobs. To clear up any further assumptions, micro businesses, US 280, small businesses, US 315, medium-sized businesses, US 350, large businesses, US 370. I don't know what that means. I don't understand what the businesses means and what the dollar amounts relate to. Like, is that per week? I don't understand. So then she says, my field, education, early education, kindergarten, US $800 to $1,000. Primary education, US $900 to $1,100. Secondary education, $1,100 to $1,300. Secondary education with 5 years experience, $1,300 to $1,400. Associate professor, master's degree, $1,050 to $1,400. Full professor, doctorate, $1,400 to $1,750. Is this like weekly or daily? I don't She's saying these are the salaries. This can't be yearly. This can't be yearly. Because she's saying a doctorate salary range is US $1,400 to $1,750. This has to be like weekly or something. And again, I don't know what country she's in, so maybe the cost of living is different or something. Anyway, let's continue. So she says the cost of living here is affordable, and I mentioned that in several comments. I am not from the United States where life is more expensive. In my country, this salary is more than enough to live comfortably. I am not rich, but my kids enjoy an excellent quality of life. Private school tuition varies. There are schools as low as $120 per month or less, and of course, there are elite schools that are much more expensive. We use local currency, not dollars. I also have other sources of income that are irrelevant here. Okay, so it sounds like maybe the salary ranges she was mentioning were weekly salary ranges. Because I don't see, she said she's a secondary education teacher. The highest on that salary range was $1,300. I don't see $120 per month private school being comfortable if you're only making $1,300 a month. So it has to be weekly. Anyways, she said, now to stop the speculation, people assumed I was from multiple countries, calculated my monthly tuition costs, and even tallied up all my expenses. The only thing you missed was calculating the cost of my divorce. Let me save you some trouble. I didn't pay a single cent, and my ex left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Careful not to choke on that. As for my kids not being well cared for, my kids are perfectly fine, and as long as I'm breathing, no one will take that away from them. I saw a lot of concern for my children, but here's a question for you. What about your kids? Are they okay? Did you pay what you owe for their care? When was the last time you saw them? There's no need to worry about my kids. If any of those users want more details, feel free to contact me, and I'll happily send over some bills for you to pay since you're so interested in my finances and expenses. And regarding my divorce, it was far from amicable. Not because of custody, that was never an issue, but because my ex lied at every turn to delay and obstruct the process. I didn't accept it then, I don't accept it now, and I never will, not in a million years. For those still questioning my divorce, here are my words to you. Once there's infidelity, there's no family left. This clarification isn't for those who offered helpful comments or advice on my post. End of the informational break. Now, the actual update. The day after my post here, my ex was arrested for domestic violence and child abuse. The father of the boy involved filed a complaint. My ex's wife defended him, claiming that her son was a brat and that this wasn't the first time her son had been violent with him or his younger siblings. This left me surprised because, as far as I know, my ex had never mentioned that the teenager had been beaten. My ex-sister-in-law said that her brother, meaning my ex, never brought it up. I asked my kids if their stepbrother had ever touched them or been violent with them. Both said no. My children are comfortable telling me anything, and their answer was no. My ex and his wife have since changed their story about the incident. Now their version is that the boy misbehaved, my ex tried to talk to him, and the boy hit him first, so the mother hit her son to pull him off my ex. This is terrible. This is terrible. Now the mom is lying to protect the stepfather of her own kid. Both of them deserve each other. The ex and his new wife, they deserve each other. Opie says, child protection authorities here are usually very strict when a case interests them or when the harm suffered by the child is severe. I haven't seen the teenager myself. The teenager has been placed in a shelter for abused youth. What? Why couldn't he have stayed with his father? Wasn't he at his father's house? His biological This is getting sad. I mean, it already was sad for the kids, but this is just terrible. Oh my goodness. Someone said, wow, father of the year. No good for bio kids, no good for stepkids. Seems like his wife and him are a perfect fit. Anyone touches my kids, I'll turn into a raging bull. Someone said, I totally agree with you. A father's denial. Your children have the right to express their feelings, especially if they feel their father isn't present. You've worked hard to provide them with stability and security, and it's fair to acknowledge how their father's actions impact their view of him. And then another comment, I am sorry that people are treating you this way or making you feel that way in this terrible situation. You are handling it very well and doing what is best for your children. It sounds like your husband is getting what is coming to him. I feel terrible for the other young man in this situation who is now being held in a shelter for abused youth. Opie responded, yes, they do that to check him physically and mentally. Then they hand him over to one of the parents who can be responsible. I feel bad because classes are not over yet. Oh, okay, so maybe it sounds like it's just a temporary thing while they investigate the situation. Hopefully after that he can go back to his biological father. But this is, what was the dad doing? So what was OP's ex over there doing? Was he hitting up on that little boy? Okay, so this is update 4, 14 days later. She says, hi, I thought long and hard before posting this update because I feel like my initial post and this one don't serve the purpose as they don't directly involve my children. Here's what happened. It was determined that the 15-year-old boy was indeed assaulted. I don't have all the details about what was said during his interview since, being a minor, that information is protected. From what I understand, my ex-mother-in-law hired a lawyer, and with the mother's statement, my ex was cleared of the violence charges. However, the boy insists on a different version of what happened. In the middle of all this, my ex had an altercation with a police officer when they were separating him from the boy's father, which led to his arrest for a week. In the end, there were no charges for violence or child harm. On the other hand, the boy's mother is still on maternity leave, and from what I've heard, she was referred to parenting and anger management courses. The boy's father can't take care of him full time, and the boy said he would go back to his mother if my ex left the house. Apparently that didn't happen, so the boy is currently staying with his paternal grandmother. That's all I know for now. That is sad. That is so sad. I feel so bad for that boy. All the adults in his life that are supposed to be protecting him and providing him with a safe environment are just not. And understandably, the father can't take care of him full time right now for whatever reason, but that's sad. Opie says, my eldest son knows what happened, but it wasn't through me. I want to clarify that because people tend to assume a lot here. I don't think I'll update again unless this directly involves my kids, and honestly, I hope it doesn't come to that. For now, my kids' visits to my ex are suspended. While I respect the court's decision, I still have my doubts about how the situation was handled, and I'm shocked at how justice worked in this case. I don't want to speculate, but there are rumors that my ex-mother-in-law paid a lot of money. I can't confirm that though. That is just, let me go to her page. That was the final update, but let me see if there was anything else. Nope, that was 1 month ago. I don't see anything else. I hope that kid can get some love and support at his grandparents' house because this is a mess. This whole thing is a mess. Okay. I'm trying to debate if I want to do the other story because it's also long. This video is gonna be an hour and a half. I'll go ahead and do it. I'll give you guys a long one because I've been intermittent with my posting the past few days, so I'll go ahead and do the other one. I think my husband, 38 male, is starting to resent our daughter for female. How do I deal with this? I'm posting this on a throwaway account because my husband knows my account and I feel bad about bringing our problems to the internet. But I don't have anyone else I can turn to about this without things getting worse. I don't even know where to start with this. For some context, my husband and I, 42 female, have been together for nearly 16 years and married for 10. We met while he was passing by the city I lived in at the time for work-related reasons, and after keeping in touch over the phone for a long while and multiple hints and signs from my end, he confessed his love for me, and we've been together since. He moved in with me after 3 years and settled in well. My family loves him, and he managed to land a good job as a high school history teacher for a school nearby. Our entire relationship, he has been very loving and nurturing, always taking my feelings into consideration and going far out of his way to keep the both of us happy. He is incredibly sweet and a huge sweetheart, and even after being with him for 16 years, my love for him hasn't faltered at all. With that being said, it's a big reason why his recent behavior has completely blindsided me, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. We had our first child, who I'll call D for now, almost 5 years ago. My pregnancy was incredibly smooth and easygoing, and all throughout, my husband was even more gentle and loving towards me, and it made me feel incredibly lucky to be starting a family with him. There were some complications with the birth, but overall, it was a very wonderful experience, and the both of us were overjoyed to finally have our daughter. For the first month or so, my husband was stubbornly persistent that I let him do all the heavy lifting and to only focus solely on myself and Dee. During this time, he took up nearly all the house chores, with my parents and sister stopping by often to help out with Dee and the other chores, and made sure to spend time with Dee whenever I needed a break. Once we both started going to work again, he called my parents during his lunch break to make sure everything was okay. During Dee's later infancy and in her early baby years, he laid back a little bit more and stopped checking in as much, but by no means did he give her less attention. However, over time, I noticed that he was gradually spending less and less time with Dee and seemed to be focusing on his work more. I love Dee with all of my heart, and I am so incredibly grateful and happy she's in our lives, but I would be lying if I said she was an easy baby. She is incredibly stubborn and lively for her age, so when me and my husband aren't scrambling to make sure she doesn't get herself hurt or do something she isn't supposed to, we're busy calming her down from a tantrum, and it can be a little taxing. Yikes. More so, I've begun to notice how much it seems to be wearing down on my husband. Nowadays, he is less motivated or energetic than he used to be. He is still sweet to me, but he's beginning to pull away from me and Dee, and our life in the bedroom is completely dead at this point. Despite this, the most upsetting thing I've noticed recently is how distant he's becoming with Dee. The other day, she was excitedly trying to tell him during breakfast about this show she had been watching, and he just put his cereal in the fridge and walked away. Ooh-wee. The look on Dee's face after she asked me why he was ignoring her completely shattered my heart. Another problem we've been having recently is how little he's doing to help with Dee. Every morning, I wake up early to get her dressed and fed for the day before driving her to school and then picking her up later that day. I take her to every doctor's appointment, every dentist visit, every play date, and every event at her school. It feels like the only time my husband is around Dee is after she gets home from school and makes everyone food. This has caused many arguments between the two of us, where I'm asking him why he doesn't put any effort into his relationship with Dee, and he gets defensive but never really gives me an answer. What compelled me to post here was an argument we had earlier this week right as I was ready to walk out the door to get Dee to the babysitter since no one would be home to take care of her. I honestly can't remember how it started, but I know it started as something small that escalated quickly. Many hurtful words were exchanged, and I'll be the first to admit that many of the things I told him were out of line. He started going on a rant about how much he did for our family and how hard this was on him, to which I interrupted him and asked how it was so hard for him when I was the one doing everything related to Dee. He just snapped at me that if it weren't for her, things wouldn't be this hard. The both of us went quiet after he said that, and I probably would have torn him a new one if it weren't for the fact I was so shocked and he suddenly decided he needed to go on a walk to clear his head. This is tough. This is tough. This is tough. Because, I mean, his feelings are valid. And it probably is hard. And, like, what can you do? What can you do? Ooh, okay. She continues, this all feels like a complete shock to me, as I'd been under the impression that my husband was happy and just going through a rough time. Yet after that comment, I haven't stopped rethinking about every aspect of our relationship after D. I feel heartbroken and numb, and I have no idea where to go from here. Me and my husband have hardly been talking to each other since the fight, and honestly, I have no idea what I'd even say. At this point, it's starting to drain me, and although I love him very much, if he doesn't start getting his act together, I'm not sure I'll be able to handle it much longer. What can I do about this? I can't imagine my future without him, and I don't want to divorce him, but I'm tired and stressed out and trying not to cry myself to sleep tonight thinking about it. TLDR, me and my husband have been going through a rough patch recently because of him pulling away after the birth of our daughter and after he admitted he thought life would be easier if we'd never had D. I'm starting to rethink and freak out over what this means for our marriage. Whew. This is tough. I have no advice, no commentary. I don't really think either person really is in the wrong or anything here. It just seems like a tough, hard situation. And this is one of the reasons, not to make it about me, but this is my channel. This is one of the reasons why I am child free. Like, it would take a very special situation for me to even consider having a child because of something like this. Like, you could think you're prepared in the beginning, you could be gung-ho, it could be easy, but children are humans and they grow up and they change and they have emotions and they have happy days and hard days and complications and achievements, and you have to be prepared for the roller coaster of whatever twists and turns come. And you don't get to see the roller coaster before you get on it. You just have to get on and hope that the ride is not too scary. It is, whew, child. I feel for them. I mean, the only thing I could say is counseling. I think at this point, that would be the only thing they could probably do right now to try and navigate through this. So a couple of comments, someone said, what has been so hard for him? You need that answer. It might be time for couples counseling because he's not communicating anything specific, but angry, frustrated emotion. That conversation is still needed because you can't solve an issue without knowing the actual problem he's having. And someone else, this, counseling and do not have another child. OP responded, we agreed that when we had children, we'd have 2 to 3, but given the fact pregnancy at my age could be dangerous and how stressful things are, I think we've both silently agreed that having another child would be a bad idea. Another comment, at this stage, it's not even the danger, it's the fact you're both struggling with this one. He's struggling and it's impacting your marriage. He's distant to your kid while you're having to overcompensate. And then another person, from everything you've said here, I can't help but think your husband is burned out. You need to talk to him like several others said and ask him to finish that sentence. Then you need to give him a safe space to be honest with you. That's very important. You talk about him taking on everything, and I just wonder if he eventually wore out and this is the result. If he is feeling what you think, there is probably a lot of shame around it, and he is probably just shoving it down and making everything worse, shame spiraling. Talk when tensions are not high. Don't address this during a fight. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt based on what you've said, but be prepared you might not like his answers, and of course, always protect yourself and child first. OP responded, I am starting to worry there might be something going on with his emotional and mental health. In the past, he's shown signs of something underlying that made me raise an eyebrow, but I shrugged it off because most of the time he was very happy and rounded. I guess it's all starting to boil over at this point, and I'm really worried I made it worse with the argument since he's even more distant now. And then the last comment here says, he's a teacher. That job has gotten harder every year for years. I wouldn't be surprised if he's burned out at work and burned out at home. Dealing with kids all day and coming home to a kid having done it is not easy. It's very, very hard, even though the kids aren't the same ages. His students drain everything away, and then he comes home to an adorable chatterbox who drains even more. He needs therapy for burnout and a planned time and strategy to recharge his batteries. That sounds like a good idea. It does sound a little bit like burnout. I would seek some professional assistance, and I do think they need to communicate. Sounds like she's noticing a lot of things but not saying anything, and it sounds like he's feeling a lot of things but not saying anything. So there's a little bit of communication breakdown between the two. So the update was 2 days later. She said, a lot has happened since I last posted, and in all honesty, I don't know where to begin. Though, I guess I should start with saying me and my husband are going to go to couples counseling, and I'm very optimistic of things going back to the way they were before everything started to boil over. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who commented and helped me understand what he and I are going through and how to navigate it. Someone even recommended an episode from this podcast that helped me a lot. I didn't expect this to get so much attention, but either way, I am very grateful for everyone who left helpful and insightful advice for me. That being said, this update is going to be very long, so buckle up. Phew, let me readjust here. When I originally posted, the argument that sparked my posting about this happened almost a whole week before, though now it has been a little over since we had the argument. The day after I posted, I decided to look into therapy and counseling for me and my husband, as well as play therapist for D, as some people suggested her being so dysfunctional wasn't normal. And she might be going through something as well, either related or unrelated to the behavior of my husband and I. I spent all day making up a list of what I needed/wanted to bring up during our talk that I planned to have later that day. I was kind of obsessing over what I wanted to say and how to say it, as many of you guys suggested to be gentle with my wording and encourage honesty and transparency. D was sick, so she didn't go to school, and I alternated between focusing on preparing for the talk and making sure she was okay and taken care of while my husband was at work. I was in the middle of getting some medicine for my daughter around 12:30 p.m. when my husband called me. I answered, and he asked me how my day was going and if there was anything I needed him to do after he got off work or when he got back home. I was a little surprised by him calling, since he hasn't called me on his lunch break for a checkup in a long while, and I could have been crazy, but it sounded like he'd just been done crying because he sounded a little raspy and quiet. Me and him talked for all his lunch break. I didn't bring up anything since I just wanted to have a conversation with him and wanted to save the actual talk until we were in person. Until eventually he had to go and hung up. I'll be honest, it made me really worried, since although he used to do this all the time before D, like I said, he hasn't done it in a while, and I was overthinking about why he would have called me. Not gonna lie, that would have had me on high alert too. If all of a sudden like his pattern is changing, I would be like, is it good, bruh? She says, I think D realized I was troubled because of her father, because when I came back, she asked me who I was talking to, and I told her who. She asked me in a very quiet and sad voice if I was sad because Papa was ignoring me as well. Now, I'm a very resilient woman, especially when it's come to putting on a brave face for my daughter, but after she said that, I felt so distraught and guilty from how aware she is of the situation and how she thinks of her relationship with her father that I started crying, which in turn made her cry as well. While we were hugging, I made sure to reassure her that her father will always love her and he's just having a bad time, to which she told me how she didn't want him to be having a bad time. I took the chance to ask her if she was having a bad time, and she admitted to me she was sad because she thought Papa didn't love her and she wanted him to be happy again. That is sad. That is sad. Man, kids really kids be knowing. And she's only what, 5? I think what OP said? 4. She's only 4. And she already can tell what's going on. So OP continues, we both cuddled on her bed and eventually I fell asleep comforting her. I woke up later that day and by that time the sun had already set. Dee was still sleeping and I could hear my husband watching something in our room. I got up and after making sure Dee was properly tucked in, I headed into our room and once my husband noticed me, he paused the show he was watching and asked me how I slept. I told him I slept fine and asked him how his day went and he said fine as well. I decided to join him in bed and he offered me a pillow for my back before unpausing the TV. It was awkward. It was clear there was something he wanted to tell me and I needed to talk to him, but neither of us knew how to start the conversation. Eventually, at some point, he laid his head down on my lap and I started stroking his hair. He had his arm under my legs and we both sat in silence for a while as we watched TV. Eventually, I decided that we needed to talk and I wasn't going to delay it any longer, so I paused the TV and asked him if we could talk. He seemed really hesitant and kind of tensed, but he said, sure. So I took a deep breath and tried to remember everything I'd written down on the list earlier. I started off by saying how I'd noticed him withdrawing and being distant for a few years now, and after our argument a week ago, I was starting to get really worried. I didn't try to sugarcoat it. I wasn't being hostile or accusative, but I made sure to be very clear that Dee and I were starting to be affected by his behavior, and under no circumstances could this go on. I was tearing up a little bit, and at some point he flipped around in my lap and was hugging my stomach as I kept talking. I went on a bit of a rant about how tired I was and I felt like he wasn't doing enough to help and how I was worried about him. I did bring up a few of your guys' points and mentioned how he was acting towards Dee was negligent and he was setting her up for a whole life of pain if he didn't stop. I didn't feel good about saying it, but I needed him to understand the gravity of this situation. At this point, I could tell he started crying because his breathing started to hiccup and I could feel my shirt starting to get wet where his face was, not to mention he was trembling as he held me tighter. My husband is and has always been a very emotional man, though typically he doesn't cry a lot. And seeing him cry so silently while shaking so hard was making me really nervous and worried, and I practically begged him to talk to me. He just kept clinging onto me for a long moment, and I thought he wasn't going to answer me before he told me with a very choked up voice how sorry he was. He sat up and explained how he'd never wanted to hurt me or Dee, but everything's been so hard on him recently, and he had no idea what to do about it and just started clamming up. I asked him to elaborate, but he just got really choked up and seemed to be struggling to get his words out. Okay, so what's going on? Like, dang, we still got so much more left. What's going on? She says, I was worried he was going to shut down and pull away, and in the moment, I admitted I had posted on here to get some advice, and I thought he should look through some of you guys' comments to understand a little better. He agreed and I gave him my phone and I rubbed his back as he read through here. After reading for a while, he gave me back my phone, and even though he tried to keep himself together, it was clear he was barely holding it together. I told him that I wasn't going to interrupt him and I wanted him to be honest with me about what was going on. And after I said that, he completely broke down. He talked for a very long time as he was all over the place, so I'm going to try my best to explain everything he did in chronological order here to avoid confusion. So finally, we're getting some answers, because sheesh. She said, as I mentioned in the original post, me and my husband met a while back while he was visiting my city before he eventually moved in with me while we were dating. Something that's relevant now that I hadn't mentioned previously is that my husband is from a different country and migrated to the US about 2 years before we met. He told me how, back at home, his dad wasn't really there and he could count on his hand the number of conversations the two had together that lasted more than 10 minutes. His mother was always very stressed out and didn't seem to like him or his siblings very much. And the fact that he's always been very sensitive and was never into what other kids his age liked, he had a very poor relationship with most of his brothers. The only person of his family who is still alive and he talks to is his younger sister, though due to reasons he asked me to keep private, their relationship is very strained. Me and my husband are different in many ways. I'm more outgoing, outdoorsy, and confident, while he tends to be more quiet, nerdy, and in some aspects a little insecure. Because of this, our social circles hardly interlap, and as a commenter has made me realize recently, I regretfully knew close to nothing about my husband's group of friends or who he hangs out with besides me. Well, as it turns out, he doesn't. He told me how at the beginning he met two guys at a bar who he became friends with. He told me briefly of them early on in our relationship, but he didn't talk about them a whole lot, and I admit I never bothered to ask. He told me how they were always planting ideas in his mind that I was holding him down and that dating an older woman when he was still so young and should have been experimenting was something he was going to regret in the future when he was old and no one wanted him anymore. He defended me and told them to stop talking about me like that. He admitted he kept hanging out with them because they were his only friends, and when they weren't bad-mouthing me, they were really fun. Well, after he got a job and got married, they stopped talking to him as much, and when they did finally talk and meet up again, they showed up with a female friend of theirs and told him to have fun one last time before he tied himself down. Oh wow. Misery love company, don't it? He got into a huge fight with them that almost got physical had it not been for the girl stepping in to break them up, and my husband came home in a horrible mood. I remember that day a little, though when I'd asked him why he was so mad, he just said he got into an argument with someone at the grocery store, and that's why he was upset. Even at the time, I didn't believe him, but I didn't press him further since he was practically hiding himself away in our bed and clearly didn't want to talk. He told me how since then he's been having an impossible time trying to make new friends, and even though he's gotten used to how distant people are in America compared to his home country, he still feels incredibly lonely and isolated, and for nearly 16 years, he's been trying to make up all the social interaction he's been craving through his one work friend or ignoring it and putting all his attention and time into me so he felt less lonely. When Dee was born, he put every last drop of effort into me and her, hardly stopping to relax since any time he did, he was just reminded of the giant hole in his life. Through sobs, he admitted there had been many times he'd been tempted to drink or harm himself just to forget about it, but never went through with it because he wanted to stay strong for his family and knew there was a history of alcoholism in his family and couldn't bear the thought of losing himself to it. He explained how after putting so much focus onto his life, he completely crashed and just felt tired and lost all the time, and with how much Dee started to act out and how taxing it was to take care of her, he started thinking back to what his old friends had told him and wondered if this was what they'd been talking about. He was practically stumbling over himself, apologizing to me for letting them get to his head and letting himself blame and resent Dee and I for everything wrong in his life. At this point, he was having a hard time breathing and was hugging me so tightly I thought my spine would snap. It was so painful seeing him trying to keep his sobs quiet to avoid waking Dee up, despite the fact he was clearly spiraling, that I had to interrupt him. I know I said I wouldn't, but this is different, so he could calm down because at that point he was going down a rabbit hole of guilt and regret and just apologizing over and over again. There's a lot more he told me about the state of his mental health at the moment, but just thinking about it makes me tear up, and I know I shouldn't, but I've been beating myself up for not noticing so much sooner how he felt. I can't help but think of how horrible of a wife and partner I have to be to not notice he's been drowning this whole time, and I didn't even think to ask him about his life or friends or anything. It was the longest talk we've had in the entirety of our relationship, and by the end of it, we were both crying and holding each other. I made sure he knew how much Dee and I loved him and appreciated everything he's done for us, and I told him how I'd be by his side every step of the way, and I would make sure he got the help he needed. It was the first time we'd snuggled so closely like we did that night in a while, and miraculously, he didn't toss or turn at all that night. I stayed up as long as I could, kissing his face and rubbing his back and making sure he felt loved even long after he fell asleep. The next day, I asked him if he could call out of work for the day so we could just focus on each other, and made sure that everything we wanted to say was said, and he agreed. We spent the day bowling, eating at the local cafe, going to an ice cream shop, and then going home to make dinner together and have another talk about next steps. We've agreed to start marriage counseling and also get him into individual therapy to see what's going on and to make sure he can recover from all the bad feelings and thoughts he's been having. Many people in the original post theorized he might be depressed, and after everything he's told me, I'm almost 100% sure that's the problem. We both picked Dee up from school and asked if she wanted to go play at the park, and she was very happy to. I let my husband take the lead and watched as the two played on the playground and chased each other in the grass. I hadn't seen him that happy and energized in a very long time, and it made my heart swell. On the car ride home, he sat in the back seat with her and played I Spy out the car window until Dee told me, very excitedly, how she was so happy Papa loved her again. That's sad. I could practically hear my husband's heart shatter from the driver's seat, and he was quiet for a very long time before he just hugged her and didn't say a word for the rest of the car ride home. Dee had a very guilty expression on her face, seeing my husband get so sad, and I think my husband noticed because when we got home, he quickly excused himself to the bedroom for a second before coming back out almost as happy as he had been in the park and trying to make Dee feel better. That's sad because kids be so innocent, bruh. They just be saying whatever is on their mind. They be so innocent. OP says the rest of the day went smoothly, and as I was getting ready in the bathroom to go to bed, I heard my husband in the next room over telling Dee how much he loved her and how he never hated her and never wanted her to think so. I could hear them reading a bedtime story while I waited in bed, and eventually, my husband came into our room and got in bed with me. We talked a little bit more, and I told him how proud I was of him for how far he's come and all he's managed to survive before kissing him and getting him to cuddle me again, which took no convincing from my end. As I'm writing this, I'm lying in bed and he's fallen asleep against my chest while snoring very loudly. I don't think I'm going to be able to get any sleep myself today, LOL. We made plans to go on a weekend getaway this week. Dee's going to stay with her cousins for the time being, which she is very excited about since they have a pool and she loves to swim. I am forever grateful to everyone who decided to leave a comment and who helped me out through this, as I can only see our love growing stronger after this. My only regret is not having caught up years before this all happened. But there's nothing I can do about the past, and I'm going to just focus on repairing and rebuilding our marriage. My husband told me to tell you all, he says, thank you for all the concern and for also slapping some sense into him about his behavior, and he made a joke about just taking our problems to Reddit every time instead of paying so much for counseling sessions. This is going to be the only update unless our house blows up or something. So thank you to everyone who took the time out of their day to read and listen to my story. And if you're going through something similar, I heavily advise you sit down with your significant other and get down to the root of the problem. Trust me, it will do wonders for your relationship. Edit, I forgot to add this in, but he explained the reason he walked away when Dee was having a conversation with him was because he'd been really overwhelmed that day and felt like he was going to pass out. And in all honesty, she was just starting to get on his nerves. He apologized to her about it and promised to never do it again. Dee was very sweet and understanding with him, and I am very proud of both of them. I think that was an excellent result. See how communication can really fix things, because if they hadn't have brought this to the forefront and talked about it, he probably would have left the family. He probably would have. There's no telling how this could have ended. So I'm glad they are starting to communicate, and hopefully they introduce more lines of communication into their relationship so it doesn't have to get to this level the next time. Hopefully there's not a next time, but the next issue that comes up. But that's a good result. So I'll go ahead and go to the palette cleanser for today, and this is just a reminder to like, comment, and subscribe. This palette cleanser is from the Made Me Smile subreddit. It's a picture of this couple. I do believe they're Indian because I looked them up after I saw this picture. It's a man and a woman, and they're holding a chalkboard that has a handwritten message on it, and it says, "We are open Christmas Day from 12 to 2 p.m. If you are alone, pop in for a hug and a mince pie. You don't have to buy anything. We are family." And it has a little heart. And I thought that was just so heartwarming. So I actually did a little deep dive on these people because I was like, where is this picture from? I had to figure it out. So I think I Googled them on Facebook. I'm not exactly sure how I came across it, but they are this is what they do all the time. They're like pillars of the community. They own this small convenience store, but they always have different events and stuff for people in the community. And then I saw this one Facebook post that one of their sons wrote, and it says, "The story of how our shop started. Me and my brother are so grateful for the things our parents did for us growing up. They opened Meat and Deep News as teenagers in a foreign country and couldn't speak a word of English. On the day they opened the shop, Dad only had 1 penny in his pocket. Although their lives were not easy, they never let me and my brother miss out. Dad wore torn socks so we could buy school uniforms, and Mom would give up her dinner so me and my brother could eat. They got us through schoolwork by helping us with our homework behind the shop counter while serving customers. They found it hard to be accepted in the UK in the 70s as they were foreign, but are so proud to be accepted as British and part of our local community now. We are so proud of you both, Shashi," he put the parents' names. "Keep doing what you do and making our lives happy." And then this is, if you're watching the video, not listening, I'm on the Facebook page that they have right now. They have 11,000 followers, 11,000 likes. I guess their convenience store is called Meat and Deep. It says "Meat and Deep, your friendly community shop" on their sign. And they just have a bunch of different posts in here. It looks like they go on TikTok live and stuff. And they have different events and things. They just seem like good people who really care about others. And I just thought it would be nice to highlight them. So shout out to Meat and Deep in the UK. So that'll do it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.